We're going to go ahead and begin the afternoon phase of our fall conference. Before that, we're going to thank one of our sponsors. We've got a video that we'd like to roll as we prepare for that. And again, thank all of our sponsors. And this is our focus on our most recent sponsor. You'll see the video begin to play.
Have you grown tired of exorbitant costs, scope creep, and the lack of support by your current vendors? Are you looking for a fresh approach to handling your overhaul or outage needs? Well, then let me tell you about ST Cotter Turbine Services, the only WeBank certified complete turnkey precision rotating equipment service provider. With 200 years of combined rotating machinery experience on practically every OEM make and model in the market, our craft labor and technical field supervisors make the difference between a completed project and a safely completed project that is also on time and on budget. ST Cotter is competent in steam turbines, from 6-stage chiller turbines to super high-pressure steam turbines, all the way up to 1,100 megawatt units. Our core competencies also include stator and rotor rewinds, valve inspections, boresonics, shell welding, parts manufacturing, on-site machining, as well as a full range of steam path services and retrofits.
All right, thank you. Thank you to ST Cotter for their sponsorship, and thank you to all of those of you who have sponsored and otherwise participated in our conference. We've got a couple things that I just want to bring to your attention as we begin this afternoon's session. I've got a brief presentation that will lead into the CEO panel. At the conclusion of my presentation, which will last, say, 20-25 minutes, we'll take just a short break, get our CEOs up here, mic'd up and ready to go, and then we'll begin that CEO panel. If you have questions, that's a great time to ask questions of them. And so be thinking of those questions as I begin my presentation. So really what I wanted to talk about today is to give you a couple updates on what we've been doing at the Lignite Energy Council and the opportunities that I see ahead of us. Really, as I look back, we've had some very big recent challenges in the lignite industry over the past few years. These are just some of the highlights. From externalities, the MATS rule, next-gen, regional haze, clean power plan, all of these things have threatened the existence of the lignite industry. They were essentially attacks on the legality of burning coal to make electricity. They were implemented by people who believed that coal by itself is an evil fuel source and that they should do everything in their power to make it impossible to mine coal, to burn coal, to use electricity generated from coal. So those are the existential challenges that we faced. And up until recently, whenever I would talk to a group, I would say our biggest challenges are number one, regulation, and then number 2, 3, 4, they're all lower. What we're finding now is that with a change in administration, it might be time to say that the war on coal is over. And I say this understanding completely that there are still enemies of coal who believe that it should be illegal to burn it. But I'm coming from a place of this philosophy that I believe is a principle of just human nature, which is we can either act or be acted upon. And that's the principle that I would like to lay before you and say, as a Lignite Energy Council, we've been acted upon the last decade. We've been acted upon by people who had more resources than us and had the entire apparatus of the federal government at their disposal to make our lives miserable. We've been given a window. That window is an opportunity for us to switch that equation and become the actors in our own destiny. And I think there's great opportunities there. Now, if I back away and say, if regulations are not our single greatest threat right now, what is? Well, competition from other energy sources has flipped electricity markets on their head. This is evident across the country, but in the Midwest, it's a combination of both wind and natural gas that has flipped these energy markets. We continue to have uncertainty surrounding future regulations. We know that there's a regional haze phase 2. We know that there is still the endangerment finding out there. We know that there's uncertainty, and there will continue to be uncertainty, but it's, I hope, the type of uncertainty that we've been able to deal with in the first, the 80s, 70s, 90s, whatever, where it wasn't a threat on our very existence. We still suffer with this public perception of lignite and coal in general, that it's bad. We have programs in place through our Public Affairs Committee to kind of push back against that assumption. It shouldn't just be the default that everybody believes, yes, coal is bad, but there's good things about it, such as jobs and cheap electricity. We can push back against this whole baseline assumption that coal is bad to begin with. So the question is, if we accept the premise that you can either act or be acted upon, what do we do to act? So we need to engage our grassroots better. We just saw one of the best examples that you'll ever see anywhere in Lori Shaw from Colstrip United, somebody who just sees a problem, takes it on herself to be part of the solution. What we've learned over the past couple of years is that employees of the mines, the plants, the contractor supplier members trust their employers and the information that they provide. That's a conduit that we first started talking about maybe a year and a half ago in one of our meetings, when we said, what can we do to understand that relationship? We're going to be rolling out a program soon that will improve the mechanism of distributing information, actionable information to the employees of our mines and plants and contractor supplier members, to be able to give you the ability to walk out of work and say, I'm going to go home and here's my message. Maybe I'll post this online. Maybe I'll write a letter to the editor. Maybe I won't do anything, but the next time I'm sitting next to somebody on an airplane, I'll have better information to push back against some of these assertions. We're going to be better about getting pro-coal messages and focusing on the benefits of North Dakota, of North Dakota's lignite. You heard the way that Lori approached those, that it's been successful in rallying people to her cause. We've got a couple of those prototype messages up here that we're going to roll out in just a minute. And the third thing that we wanted to do is link the coal industry to people's lives, to make them understand the direct link that the industry has in their quality of life. To that end, we've got 3 videos that I want to show you. The middle one you've seen before, but I want to put it in the context of this broader effort. So let's go ahead and roll the first video. This is something that I'm extremely proud of, but I just want to thank those involved who worked with us to make it happen at North American Coal. This is the first effort in what we hope is going to be a series of videos that link coal to people's lives. So let's go ahead and roll that first video.
Hi, I'm Sarah, and I'm the Environmental Manager at the Coteau Properties Freedom Mine. I make North Dakota lignite coal work for you. Did you know more than 70% of the electricity in North Dakota is produced from lignite coal mined in the state?
So just a short video that I think comes with a pretty powerful message, that when you are washing the dishes, when you're turning on the light, when you're watching TV, it's not really you that's turning those items on. It's somebody like Sarah. It's somebody working in the mines and the power plants that's making their life's work to provide you with the power to do what you want to do and live the life that you want to live. So that's one of our first videos. The second one you've seen before, but let's go ahead and roll it again, and I'll put it into context of some of our new initiatives.
Remember the last game, song, or app you downloaded? To do that, you needed a few things: a good wireless connection, your account info and password, reliable electricity. Yeah, that's right, electricity. Think of all the things we use every day that runs on electricity, plugged in or charged up to go. This is the story of how most of our electricity comes from North Dakota's lignite coal. In large coal mines, we carefully set aside upper layers of soil using drag lines as big as buildings with buckets that could hold 5 pickup trucks. We mine the coal, take it to a nearby power plant, and then reclaim the soil, putting it back in its original layers. The rich topsoil is once again ready for crops, prairie grass, cattle, and wildlife. At the power plant, The coal is crushed into a fine powder and blown into the boiler's firebox, an enormous furnace chamber many stories high suspended within the plant. It heats to nearly 1,000 degrees. Environmental controls, like scrubbers, are used to remove byproducts of combustion and protect the environment. Some byproducts are useful, such as fly ash, which is used in concrete. The heat inside the boiler creates steam with intense pressure, enough to spin a turbine and a massive generator. The generator rotates long coils of copper wire inside powerful magnets, turning the spinning motion, that is, kinetic energy, into electricity. A condenser captures the steam, turning it back into water to be used again in the boiler. Outside water in separate pipes cools the condenser and then returns to a holding pond. Before heading on its way, the electricity is boosted with step-up transformers to a very high voltage. Then it travels great distances on transmission lines held up by tall metal towers. Somewhere close to your town or neighborhood, step-down transformers turn it back into lower voltage electricity for us to use in our businesses, schools, hospitals, and homes. And that's how we get power that's there when we need it. Quicker than a download, no password necessary.
So that's a video that you've seen before. It's a very big picture, factual based, just kind of fun video that explains the process of electricity generation. What we wanted to do is take the messages in there and maybe editorialize or expand upon them a little bit and really build faces for the industry. So you see the first one, which we've educated the people a little bit about the process of electricity. Let's educate them a little bit more and remind them that these people are part of their community, that they know them, and that the process of building electricity needs people in their lives to make it work. The third video that I wanted to show you is one that, again, builds upon that video and says, let's remind people that these mines and plants are right here in their communities, that they're always working to improve, and that once again, we're trying to put a face on these industries and make them more localized and real to people. So let's roll that third video.
Yeah, that was really the vision of Andy Freeman, who was the first co-op manager. He had that vision of coming out here, building the plant next to the mine, so you're not transporting the fuel. We have large volumes of lignite coal out here. Build a transmission line to transmit the power up to the service territory instead of transporting the fuel up there. So it's a lot cheaper option to do that. It came online back in November of 1970. Really built to meet all our customer needs. We serve an area, northwestern Minnesota, northeastern North Dakota, about 130-some thousand consumers up in that area. Unit 1 was built to bring the low-cost lignite energy mine mouth facility. It was really the first cyclone that was built to burn lignite fuel from North Dakota, so it's kind of unique in that standpoint. Young 2 came online in 1977, formed by Square Butte Electric Cooperative, slightly different from Minn Kota, but same general owners and common management. It was built with a deal with Minnesota Power. So over the years since that came online, Minn Kota's gotten a larger share of the unit, and actually by 2026 we'll have 100% of the output of Young 2. In 2007 we put an overfire air system on Young 2. Then that transition we added the same system on the Young 1, along with, shortly after that, selective non-catalytic reduction that was added to help reduce the NOx even further. From that, we started adding a sulfur removal system to Unit 1, and we had upgraded Unit 2 in that same rough time period to scrub 100% of the gas coming out of that unit. So in effect, we've reduced our NOx emissions by over 60%, and we're removing over 95% of the SO2 emissions. And on the tail end of all that, we also put on a system to remove mercury from both units. So we're reducing that below allowable limits on both units. Project Tundra is looking at adding a CO2 capture facility to the back end of Young 2 and capture 100% of the gas flow. Hopefully compress it, put it into a pipeline. If we can't work out an arrangement with that, maybe it's got to be injected into a permanent storage nearby. It needs steam and electricity. So the steam could either come from a separate cogen unit and then some electricity too, or maybe just a separate little natural gas fired boiler to supply its steam needs. It also has a large electrical load, so we could either supply that off the grid, what kind of reduces our output, or maybe that cogen unit would supply some part of their electricity. So it's kind of real early stages. We're not sure which way it's going to go. We're looking for funding. It's a very expensive proposition to add on a CO2 capture facility.
So that's the third video. And what we're trying to do there is remind people that, hey, this is your resources. The people in North Dakota, you're a part of this. It's something to be proud of. It's something to understand. And we wanted to see these videos and say, that's my power plant. That's my neighbor. That's my power. And we're proud of the fact that when you turn on the light, there's a direct connection to this industry that is making that light come on. So that's our idea of how we can begin to make that transition from spending our time worrying about how we're going to respond to these regulations, to use the break in those regulations to begin becoming actors in our own future and building this grassroots network, taking advantage of the time that we've been given to build positive messages and lay the groundwork for maybe some of the projects that you just saw, next generation of Lignite facilities. What I wanted to do also in the time that we had is just briefly update you on one of these opportunities that we have, or on some of these opportunities regarding research and development. The research and development projects that we're pursuing right now are still focused for the most part on CO2. It is our biggest challenge and also our biggest opportunity. And I think that dual dynamic is why it's at the top of our list. The regulatory threat has not disappeared, but the economic benefit that it could provide if we can figure out how to economically capture, sequester, utilize it for CO2 or for EOR means that it is our greatest opportunity. We've done things over the past year along combined heat and power, other value-added projects, maybe it's CO2 for greenhouses, rare earth elements that are smaller projects that on their own are not the solution for the lignite industry moving into the future, but they grow the pie and make it our future, have more opportunities for diversification, for revenue generation, for employment, and we hope make us as an industry more resilient to economic downturns and challenges than we currently are. We also need to engage the federal policymakers that we have and take advantage of what they are working toward, which leads us to this, the grid study that Department of Energy has just been working on over the past several months. They released it. Based on the findings from that grid study, DOE has proposed a rulemaking for FERC that would require FERC to compensate utilities for providing the benefits of baseload power. So it's finally recognizing the challenge that we all understand, which is we're not compensated for everything that we provide in the electricity industry. You're provided for electrons, but you're not you're compensated for electrons, but you're not compensated for providing stability or baseload power, which is always on, always reliable. So that missing link is something that we have an opportunity to provide some input on. I kind of covered the transformational technologies along the CO2. So let me just skip forward past the rare earths and get right to the grid study. So this grid study was requested in April 2017. It was asked to examine really all electricity, wholesale electricity markets and look at the problem of compensation in wholesale energy markets and capacity markets, and really take an eye toward preventing premature baseload power plant retirements. This is the framework that implemented this. It had stakeholder input, DOE leadership. It looked at the national labs, and I don't want to beat up on EPA too much, but contrary to when EPA wrote the Clean Power Plan, this also included consultation with FERC and relevant agencies. So already there's something different about this administration. They're consulting with relevant agencies. It looked at the data from 2002 to 2017 to look at merchant plant generation, shale revolution, drop in electricity demand following a recession, which is sometimes overlooked in the whole big picture, higher variable renewable energy, which is referred to as VRE, penetration, so that in our area, 95% of it is wind. There's small solar industry, but for the most part, variable energy refers to wind in our footprint, and the expanded participation of demand response, which started getting off the ground in 2010. So here's the definitions, and it's important when you're dealing with DOE and the federal government to say what's the definition, what is your baseline assumption, and it's looking at a baseload power plant defined by high sustained output levels, high capacity factors, and limited cycling or ramping. So those fit what we would probably all consider baseload. Premature retirement is a subjective term in this DOE study. That's one of the things that I think when we had conversations with EPA, I don't think it's as subjective as they think it is, because you can really plot out the economics of a plant and plot out what its remaining useful life ought to be, given a couple determining variables. But in this case, premature retirement was a pretty subjective term. What it found was that there's not one answer for some of these retirements. There was missing money problem. This is being not compensated for certain things that are provided. There was some negative pricing in certain areas. This is something that I think we've all heard about, and we also see what I believe is the biggest economics problem, which is markets do not currently value all attributes of electricity provision. We talk about electricity being a competitive market, but it is not a free market, which is to say there are only certain attributes that are allowed in the cost calculation. And it's a rough analogy, but it would be like saying if you bought a cell phone, cell phone makers were prohibited from charging different prices based on battery capacity, based on how long your phone would last. So they couldn't tell you whether the phone you were buying was going to last 8 hours or 2 hours, but the cost that they were going to charge you was going to be the same. So that's a rough way to understand the concept of a competitive but not free market. A free market, you would be free to value everything in accordance with its economic value to you personally. So the power plant retirements that it looked at, this might be a little bit hard to see from where you are, but this is the restructuring phase of some coal plant retirements. Many of these retirements in the early 2000s were smaller, older merchant plants. The next phase of retirements is one that was probably most concerning because it was the beginning of what you would really refer to as the all-out war on coal from the federal government. These retirements came from the economic recession, prevalence of shale gas, but also aftermath VEPA, the change in regulations that were directed toward coal plants. There was also a strong utility scale wind growth, which is driven by another set of federal policies, but this phase was the first to really be linked back to federal regulations. Retirements peaked in 2015. This was the MATS deadline, and again, there's a very clear line between MATS and early retirements, premature retirements, and regardless of what the Supreme Court eventually did with MATS, those retirements, once they happen, are final. So here's another way to look at the coal retirements by year. They're decreasing. The line on the left, the gray, is all coal units. The ones on red are the ones that retired in 2014, and it tells you what their efficiency or their heat rate was. So the retired plants were smaller, older, and had higher heat rates heat rates, and therefore were dispatched less often and ran at a lower capacity factor. So you're squeezing out some of the inefficient actors. This is an interesting one, and I think you're going to see our industry has a overlap that we didn't used to have with the nuclear industry right now. They too provide very resilient and reliable electricity, and they too are getting squeezed by these same factors that we are. What you see on the blue line is the lifespan of a nuclear power plant. These are very well defined because they have to get licenses from the federal government to operate, and the license says you are licensed between this year, and at the end of that year, you have decisions to make. So theoretically, these have been essentially deemed safe to operate and effective to operate until the end of that blue line. But what you see is those blocks in the middle are when those retirement decisions were actually made. Because as these nuclear plants suffered from the same market forces as some of our coal plants, they were beginning to shut down. And the twins of coal retirements and nuclear retirements is what really concerns DOE when they say big picture. Nobody's looking at grid reliability or resiliency, the ability to bounce back from negative electricity events. So the environmental regulations that we've talked about suggest that about 27,000 megawatts was rendered uneconomic by the compliance costs. It's hard to be precise in that, but that's a good estimate. And I think that you can see when you look at those retirements that there was a convergence of factors, some economic and some regulatory, but the fact that they peak when the MATS was going into, or the MATS deadline and the Clean Power Plan finalization, that's when the retirements peaked, means that those plants were very much impacted by the regulatory environment. So here's something that you're going to hear more about in the power world, which is this concept of resilience versus reliability. We've always talked about reliability, but there's a subtle difference between reliability and resilience. And it's illustrated best in the bottom bullet, which says when subjected to a polar vortex event, only 34 of the 98 portfolios which were classified as reliable were also resilient. So reliable is, resilient is probably a subset of reliable, but it's the ability to bounce back from a polar vortex and not have your footprint go offline for extended periods of time. And what they see, which was probably contrary to what they expected, was greater portfolio diversity didn't correlate with resilience. And you might hear that, and we may have even said it, which is an all of the above supply is best for reliability, but it's not necessarily best for resiliency because all of those power sources are not equal. For resiliency, it's kind of an easy equation. You want coal or nuclear. And if you want the most resilient of all, you want mine mouth coal because there is no transportation disruption. You don't have to worry about a coal train being held up, derailed, or have your rail capacity being the costs driven up when rail demand goes up. So that's why portfolio diversity, all of the above, doesn't necessarily correlate with resiliency. It's a very small set of power plants that are truly resilient and add that element to the grid. So that's kind of what I just said, that the resilience definition that they're working with is withstanding and recovering from extreme weather events, and it gives a couple examples of polar vortex, the Sandy hurricane, and even down into the recent hurricanes in Florida. So going back to what can we do to act, the Department of Energy has come up with policy recommendations that they are looking at right now. And what are these going to look at? The Department of Energy is going to support industry efforts and focus R&D to enhance system resilience, accelerate and reduce costs for relicensing and permitting. Relicensing is going to generally refer to the nuclear fleet, but probably some of the hydro as well. We hope to be able to take advantage of the permitting when Scott Pruitt, EPA administrator, was in Grand Forks. I can't remember who brought it up, but the subject of new source review was brought up to say it's counterintuitive that when somebody wants to make improvements to a plant that would make it more efficient, more safe, and I would say now more resilient, that the barriers increase. Essentially, the more good you want to do for a plant, the greater your barriers become. So the fact that they're recognizing permitting reform might be needed is very beneficial. Facilitate programs for workforce development, prioritize energy dominance, and Executive Order 13783, which is about energy dominance. Increase coordination of electric and natural gas industries. And then it's broken these policy recommendations out into 3 areas, 2 of which we deal very much with, which is the FERC, to expedite efforts to reform energy price formation. This is our greatest opportunity right now as FERC looks at that and says, what can we do to accurately capture the benefits that resilient power provides? What can we do to make sure that the benefit of having an 8-hour battery life on your phone is actually captured in the price and not hiding that from the consumer? So that's the critical question that FERC has been already tasked with undertaking. To value new and existing essential reliability services, which is a slightly different way to look at it. EPA, again, this is huge for our industry, to allow coal-fired power plants to improve efficiency and reliability without triggering new regulatory approvals and associated costs. That one change could have huge implications for us to allow us to do better across the board for our businesses, for our mines, for our plants, for our consumers, for everybody, and really is a great example, I think, of the EPA, the partnership that they're trying to engage in right now instead of just the command and control that we saw over the last administration. NRC is going to do their own thing regarding nuclear rules. They don't necessarily overlap with what we're trying to do in the power industry, or in the coal industry. So I wanted to take just a little bit of time. We didn't see the grid presentation this morning because the DOE order to direct FERC to come up with this price formulation, it's kind of taken off like wildfire in Washington, D.C. right now, and they're having a hearing about it today, which is where their presenter this morning from DOE was summoned to go. So the action, I mean, that rock is rolling right now down the hill, and we needed to be a part of that. And it's going to be one of our strongest priorities coming out of this meeting, is to jump in the middle of this debate and make sure that those resiliency calculations are accurate with what we know we can provide in North Dakota with a resilient power supply. So with that, that's what I wanted to cover with you today, give you an accurate picture of where the DOE process is, what we're doing with the grid study, what we're doing with the FERC directive, and where I think that we should be able to take, where we can go with this brief window that we have from the federal government when they're going to be working with us as a partner instead of working against us as an adversary, and talking about what I think it means as an industry to be actors in our own destiny instead of being simply acted upon by the federal government. So with that, thank you for your time. We're going to take a brief break before we circle back here with the CEO. So thank you.